Rachel was having one of those ordinary Tuesdays that you never think twice about. She'd just finished her shift at the elementary school where she taught second grade, and now she was at the grocery store picking up ingredients for dinner. Her cart was filled with the usual stuff: pasta, tomatoes, ground beef, some apples for the kids' lunches. Nothing special. Nothing that would suggest her entire life was about to change forever. The checkout line moved slowly, and Rachel found herself scrolling through her phone, looking at photos her husband had sent of their two kids playing in the backyard. They were building something with cardboard boxes, probably another fort. She smiled at the screen. These were the moments that made everything worthwhile: the chaos, the noise, the endless laundry. She loved being a mom. She loved the simple rhythm of her life. After paying for her groceries, Rachel loaded the bags into her car and started the drive home. The afternoon sun hung low in the sky, painting everything in that golden autumn light that photographers love. Leaves were starting to fall from the trees, covering the sidewalks in shades of red and orange. She had the radio on, humming along to some pop song she didn't quite know the words to. Her neighborhood was just a few blocks away. She knew these streets like the back of her hand. She'd driven this exact route hundreds of times, maybe thousands. The stoplight at Maple Street and Fifth Avenue always seemed to catch her on red. Today was no different. She rolled to a stop and glanced around, taking in the familiar scenery. That's when she noticed the young woman crossing the street. She looked to be in her mid-20s, juggling several shopping bags while pushing a baby stroller with one hand. The bags kept slipping down her arm, and she was struggling to keep everything together. Rachel could relate to that. She'd been there herself, trying to do too much at once, refusing to make two trips when one would somehow work if you just balanced everything perfectly. The woman finally made it to the curb, readjusting her bags with a visible sigh of relief. The baby in the stroller couldn't have been more than 6 months old, wrapped in a blue blanket with little stars on it. Rachel could see a tiny hand waving in the air, grabbing at nothing the way babies do. The light was still red. Rachel reached for her water bottle, taking a quick sip. A few other cars were stopped at the intersection. An older man in a pickup truck sat in the lane beside her. Behind her, she could see a teenager in the rearview mirror, probably heading home from school. Everything was normal. Everything was fine. Then she heard it. A sound that didn't belong. The deep, aggressive roar of an engine being pushed too hard. Her head snapped to the left, and that's when she saw the silver car. It was coming fast. Way too fast. And it wasn't slowing down. The driver's head was tilted forward, slumped against the steering wheel in a way that made Rachel's stomach drop. Something was wrong. The man wasn't in control. Whether he'd had a medical emergency or fallen asleep or something else entirely, it didn't matter. What mattered was that he was going to blow right through the intersection. Rachel's eyes darted back to the crosswalk. The young mother had paused on the opposite corner, bending down to pick up something the baby had dropped. She was completely unaware of what was about to happen. The stroller sat just inches from the road, right in the path of that speeding car. Time did something strange then. Rachel had heard people talk about how everything slows down in moments of crisis, and she'd always thought it was just a saying. But it's real. Impossibly real. She could see every detail with crystal clarity, the way the sunlight reflected off the silver car's hood, the exact angle of the stroller's front wheels, the pattern on the mother's jacket. Everything sharp and bright and happening in slow motion, even though she knew only seconds were passing. Her body moved before her brain could catch up. She didn't make a decision in the traditional sense. There was no time to weigh options or think through consequences. Her hand shot out, yanking the door handle. She threw her door open and ran. Her shoes hit the pavement hard. She could hear her own breathing loud in her ears. The silver car was maybe 30 feet away now, 20. The engine noise was deafening. The mother finally looked up, her eyes widening as she registered what was happening. But she was frozen, locked in that terrible moment of understanding when you know something awful is coming but your body won't respond. Rachel's legs pumped harder. 15 feet. 10. She could see the baby's face now, peaceful and unaware. The mother's mouth opened in a scream that Rachel couldn't hear over the roar of the engine, and her own heartbeat pounding in her skull. She reached them with maybe 2 seconds to spare. Her hands found the stroller handle. She shoved with everything she had, pushing the stroller and the mother backward, away from the curb, away from the road. The mother stumbled, her bags flying everywhere, but she and the baby were moving out of the path of the car. Rachel felt a spike of relief. They were going to be okay. The baby was safe. She'd done it, but she was still in the road. The impact hit her left side like a freight train. There was no pain at first, just an enormous force that lifted her completely off the ground. She felt herself flying through the air, suspended for what seemed like forever. The world spun sky-ground, sky-ground. She could see people's faces frozen in expressions of horror. She could see the blue of the October sky, so bright it almost hurt. Then she hit the pavement and everything went white with pain. Her head bounced once against the concrete. She tried to breathe but couldn't seem to remember how. There were sounds all around her, screaming, tires screeching, someone yelling for help. But they seemed far away, muffled, like she was underwater. She tried to move and realized she couldn't feel her left leg. That should have scared her, but she felt strangely calm, detached. Like this was happening to someone else and she was just watching from a distance. Through the chaos and the noise, she heard one sound clearly. A baby crying. Not hurt crying, just fussy crying. The normal kind of crying that meant everything was fine. The baby was alive, safe. That young mother and her child were going to go home today. They'd have tomorrow and the day after that and all the days that would have been stolen if Rachel hadn't run. She closed her eyes as the pain started to break through the shock. Someone was kneeling beside her, telling her not to move, telling her help was coming. She wanted to ask about the baby, wanted to make sure, but the words wouldn't come out right. Everything was getting fuzzy at the edges, darkness creeping in from all sides. Her last clear thought before she lost consciousness was about her own kids. She wondered if they'd finished building their fort. She hoped her husband would remember to take photos. She hoped they'd understand someday why she did what she did. She hoped they'd be proud. The sirens were getting closer now, but Rachel couldn't hear them anymore. She drifted away on that October afternoon, having made a choice in a split second that would echo through the rest of her life in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. She'd saved a baby. She'd been a hero, but heroes pay a price. And Rachel's bill was about to come due in ways that would change absolutely everything. The first thing Rachel noticed when she woke up was the smell. That distinctive hospital scent, antiseptic mixed with something else she couldn't quite identify. Clean but somehow wrong. Then came the sounds. Machines beeping in steady rhythms, footsteps in the hallway outside, voices murmuring just beyond her understanding. She tried to open her eyes, but her eyelids felt impossibly heavy, like someone had weighted them down while she slept. How long had she been sleeping? It felt like only moments since she'd been at that intersection, since she'd heard that engine roaring toward. The memories hit her all at once. The silver car. The baby in the stroller, running, flying through the air. The pavement rushing up to meet her. Rachel forced her eyes open. The room swam into focus slowly. White ceiling tiles. Fluorescent lights that were too bright even though they were dimmed. An IV pole standing beside her bed, tubes running down to her arm. And sitting in a chair pulled close to the bed, his head bowed and his hand wrapped around hers, was her husband, David. He must have sensed her stirring because his head lifted immediately. The look on his face made her heart break a little. His eyes were bloodshot and exhausted. He had at least 2 days' worth of stubble on his jaw. His shirt was wrinkled like he'd slept in it, which he probably had. Rachel, he breathed, and his voice cracked on her name. Oh God, you're awake. You're actually awake. She tried to speak, but her throat felt like sandpaper. David was already reaching for a cup of water with a straw in it, holding it gently to her lips. The water was the best thing she'd ever tasted. How long? She managed to whisper. 3 days, David said. And she saw his eyes fill with tears he was trying hard to hold back. You've been unconscious for 3 days. They said they weren't sure when you'd wake up. They kept saying we had to wait and see. 3 days. She'd lost 3 whole days. Rachel tried to process that, but her mind felt foggy, like she was thinking through cotton. 3 days of her life just gone. What had happened to the kids? Who was taking care of them? Were they scared? The kids, she said. Are they? They're fine. They're with my sister. They wanted to be here, but the doctors said it was better to wait until you were stable. David squeezed her hand carefully, like he was afraid she might break if he held on too tight. Rachel, do you remember what happened? The accident came back in flashes. The baby, she said. Is the baby okay? A small smile crossed David's exhausted face. The baby's fine. Perfect, actually. Not a scratch on him or his mom. You saved them. You really saved them. Relief flooded through her so strong it made her dizzy. The baby was okay. That was all that mattered. Except David's smile had faded, and now he was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Sadness mixed with something else. Fear maybe? Or pity, what? Rachel asked. What's wrong? Before David could answer, the door opened and a doctor walked in. She was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a bun. She smiled when she saw Rachel was awake, but it was the sort of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. A professional smile, the kind doctors give when they have bad news to deliver. Mrs. Chen, I'm Dr. Patricia Morrison. I've been overseeing your care since you arrived. She pulled up a chair on the other side of the bed. How are you feeling? Confused, Rachel admitted. And my head hurts. A lot. That's to be expected. You suffered a traumatic brain injury, among other things. The pain is normal and we're managing it with medication. Dr. Morrison pulled out a tablet and tapped at the screen. Do you remember the accident? Rachel nodded, then immediately regretted it as pain shot through her skull. A car hit me. I pushed a woman and her baby out of the way. That's right. The car struck you on your left side with significant force. You were thrown approximately 15 feet and landed on the pavement. The doctor's voice was gentle but matter-of-fact. Rachel appreciated that. She didn't want to be coddled. She wanted the truth. You've undergone 2 surgeries since you arrived. One to address internal bleeding and another for your pelvis, which was badly fractured. Rachel tried to process that information. Surgeries, fractured pelvis. It sounded serious but somehow still abstract, like it was happening to someone else. What else? She asked, because she could tell from the way David was looking at her and the careful tone in Dr. Morrison's voice that there was more, something they didn't want to say. Dr. Morrison set down her tablet and looked directly at Rachel. You suffered severe trauma to your spine and left leg. We had to perform emergency surgery to stabilize your spine, but there was significant nerve damage. Additionally, your left leg sustained multiple fractures and soft tissue damage. The words hung in the air between them. Rachel waited for the rest. The part that explained why David looked like his whole world had collapsed. Why the doctor's smile didn't reach her eyes. The nerve damage to your spine has resulted in impaired mobility in your left leg. Dr. Morrison continued. At this point, we can't determine the full extent of your recovery. You may regain some function with intensive physical therapy, but it's unlikely you'll ever have full mobility again. The words hit harder than the car had. Rachel stared at the doctor, trying to understand what she was really saying. What does that mean? What are you telling me? It means you probably won't walk the same way again, David said quietly. His voice was thick with emotion. The doctors don't think you'll be able to walk without assistance. Maybe a cane or crutches or a wheelchair, Rachel finished. The word felt foreign in her mouth. Impossible. You're saying I might need a wheelchair. We're saying we don't know yet, Dr. Morrison said. Every case is different. Some patients regain more mobility than we expect. Others regain less. We won't know where you'll fall on that spectrum until we begin therapy and see how your body responds. Rachel looked down at her body under the thin hospital blanket. She tried to move her left leg and felt something. Not nothing, but not normal either. A distant sensation, muted and weak. Like her leg belonged to someone else and she was just borrowing it. She tried to wiggle her toes. Her right foot responded immediately. Her left foot, she thought maybe something moved, but she couldn't be sure. The panic that had been lurking at the edges of her consciousness suddenly rushed in like a wave. I'm a teacher, she said, and her voice came out high and tight. I'm on my feet all day. I chase 7-year-olds around. I coach the after-school soccer club. I can't do that in a wheelchair. Let's take this one step at a time, Dr. Morrison said. Right now we focus on healing from the surgeries. Then we start physical therapy. We see what's possible. You'd be amazed at what the human body can adapt to. But Rachel wasn't listening anymore. Her mind was spinning through all the implications. How would she work? How would she take care of her kids? She had a daughter who was 7 and a son who was 9. They needed her. They needed a mom who could play with them in the backyard, who could walk them to the park, who could... What about the medical bills? She asked suddenly, a new fear gripping her. The surgeries, the hospital stay, physical therapy. How are we going to pay for all of this? David's jaw tightened. We'll figure it out. The insurance will cover most of it. We have savings. We'll be okay. But Rachel could hear what he wasn't saying. They'd have to dip into the kids' college fund. They'd probably have to take out loans. And she wouldn't be working for how long? Months, maybe longer. Her teaching salary wasn't huge, but they needed it. They'd built their budget around 2 incomes. Over the next few days, Rachel learned just how much her life had changed. Simple things she'd never thought about before became enormous challenges. Rolling over in bed sent pain shooting through her pelvis. Sitting up required help. Going to the bathroom required a nurse and equipment and such a complete loss of dignity that Rachel cried the first time. The young mother whose baby she'd saved came to visit on the 4th day. Her name was Lisa, and she brought the baby, Miguel, and flowers and tears. She kept saying thank you over and over, kept telling Rachel she was a hero, kept crying and hugging her and promising she'd never forget what Rachel had done. Rachel tried to smile and say the right things, but inside she felt empty, hollowed out. Yes, the baby was safe. Yes, she'd done the right thing. But the cost kept growing higher every day, and she was starting to wonder if she'd really understood what she was trading when she ran into that street. At night, alone in her hospital room with just the beeping machines for company, Rachel let herself cry. She cried for the life she'd had 4 days ago, for the simple pleasures of walking across a room without thinking about it, for soccer coaching and dance parties in the kitchen and hiking trails she'd never walk again. She cried for her kids, who were going to get a different mom than the one they'd had before, a damaged mom, a limited mom. And then she felt guilty for crying because a baby was alive. A mother still had her son. That had to count for something. That had to be worth it, didn't it? The physical therapist came on day 5. Her name was Angela, and she was relentlessly cheerful in a way that made Rachel want to scream. We're going to start small, Angela said. Today we're just going to try sitting up on our own and maybe standing with support. It took 20 minutes and left Rachel shaking and sweating and nearly vomiting from the pain. Standing for 30 seconds felt like running a marathon. Her left leg barely held any weight at all. Without the parallel bars and Angela's strong grip, she would have fallen immediately. That was great, Angela said with genuine enthusiasm. Really, that's a solid first effort. Rachel wanted to throw something at her. This wasn't great. This was humiliating. This was impossible. How was she supposed to do this every single day? How was she supposed to relearn how to walk like a toddler when she was 32 years old with 2 kids and a job and a life that needed her to be whole? But she didn't throw anything. She just nodded and let the nurses help her back into bed, where she stared at the ceiling and tried not to think about everything she'd lost in that split second of heroism. David brought the kids to visit that evening. They ran into the room and stopped short when they saw all the tubes and machines in the hospital bed with their mom in it, looking pale and weak. Her daughter's face crumpled, and Rachel had to use every ounce of strength she had to smile and open her arms and pretend everything was fine. Come here, babies, she said. I'm okay. I promise I'm okay. They climbed carefully onto the bed, and Rachel held them and breathed in the smell of their hair and felt her heart break and heal at the same time. This was why it was worth it. These 2 beautiful lives and the baby she'd saved and all the days ahead that wouldn't have existed if that car had hit the stroller instead of her. She had to believe that. Because if she didn't know how she was going to survive what came next. 2 months after the accident, Rachel was finally home. But home didn't feel like home anymore. Everything was the same. Same furniture, same photos on the walls, same kitchen where she used to make breakfast every morning. But she was different. And that difference changed everything. The house they'd bought 7 years ago hadn't been designed with disability in mind. Why would it be? They'd been a young family with 2 small kids. They'd worried about childproofing, not wheelchair accessibility. Now Rachel was learning all the ways her own home had become an obstacle course. The front steps required David's help every single time. The doorways were just barely wide enough for her wheelchair. The bathroom was a nightmare of tight corners and fixtures she couldn't reach. Her daughter's bedroom was upstairs, and Rachel hadn't been up there since she came home from the hospital. She couldn't manage the stairs, not even with crutches. Maybe not ever. Every morning started the same way. David would help her get dressed, which was its own special humiliation. She was 32 years old and needed help putting on pants. Then came the transfer from bed to wheelchair, which still hurt despite the pain medication. Then the slow journey to the kitchen, where she'd eat breakfast while her kids got ready for school. The worst part was watching them leave. David would take them in the morning now because Rachel couldn't drive. She'd sit at the window and wave as they backed out of the driveway, and then the house would go quiet, and she'd be alone with her thoughts and the physical therapy exercises she was supposed to do 3 times a day. The exercises were brutal. Angela came to the house twice a week now, and each session left Rachel exhausted and discouraged. She'd graduated from standing for 30 seconds to standing for a full minute. She could take 2 or 3 steps with a walker before her left leg gave out. Progress, Angela called it. To Rachel, it felt like moving mountains 1 grain of sand at a time. "You're doing great," Angela would say, and Rachel would nod and say thank you and pretend she believed it. But alone in the physical therapy room they'd set up in what used to be David's office, Rachel would sometimes just sit and cry. She'd cry from the pain and the frustration and the overwhelming feeling that she was never going to get better. This was it. This was her life now. The school district had been understanding about her extended leave, but Rachel knew she couldn't go back to teaching. Not in her classroom anyway. Teaching second graders required energy and mobility she simply didn't have anymore. She couldn't chase kids around the playground. She couldn't sit on the floor for reading circle. She couldn't even stand at the whiteboard for more than a few minutes without her legs screaming in protest. The financial strain was getting worse. David had taken on extra shifts at his job, which meant he was home even less. The medical bills kept coming despite insurance. They'd already drained their savings. The college fund they'd been building for the kids was next. Rachel felt the guilt of it constantly, a weight on her chest that made it hard to breathe. Her moment of heroism was costing her family everything. Depression crept in slowly, like fog rolling in from the ocean. At first, Rachel told herself she was just tired. The pain medication made her sleepy. The physical therapy wore her out. It was normal to feel down when you were recovering from major injuries. Anyone would feel this way, but it got worse. She started having trouble sleeping despite being exhausted all the time. Food tasted like nothing. The things that used to make her happy, reading, watching her favorite shows, talking to friends, felt hollow and pointless. She stopped answering phone calls. She made excuses when people offered to visit. She just wanted to be left alone in her misery. Her daughter noticed first. 7-year-old Lily had always been perceptive, picking up on moods and feelings that adults tried to hide. She started bringing her stuffed animals to Rachel in the wheelchair, lining them up like a protective barrier. She'd crawl into Rachel's lap and just sit there, not saying anything, just being close. "Are you sad, Mommy?" Lily asked one afternoon. Rachel tried to smile. "I'm just tired, sweetie." "You're always tired now," Lily said with the brutal honesty of children. "And you never laugh anymore. You used to laugh a lot." That observation hit harder than Rachel expected. When had she last laughed? Really laughed. Not just the polite chuckle you give when someone says something meant to be funny. She couldn't remember. Everything felt gray and muted, like she was experiencing life through a thick pane of glass. David was worried too. She could see it in the way he looked at her, in the careful tone he used when he asked how she was feeling. He suggested she talk to someone, a therapist, a support group, anyone. Rachel said she'd think about it and then didn't. What was a therapist going to do? They couldn't give her legs back. They couldn't rewind time and undo the accident. They couldn't make her whole again. 3 months post-accident, Lisa came to visit. She'd been coming regularly, once a week or so, always bringing Miguel and always with tears of gratitude in her eyes. Rachel appreciated it, she really did, but it was also exhausting. Having to be the hero, the brave woman who sacrificed everything, when inside she felt like she was falling apart. But this visit was different. Lisa sat down across from Rachel in the living room, Miguel playing on a blanket between them, and she looked nervous, fidgety, like she had something important to say and didn't know how to start. "I need to tell you something," Lisa finally said. "I've been thinking about it for weeks and I need to say it." Rachel braced herself. Was Lisa going to stop visiting? That would almost be a relief, honestly. She wouldn't have to keep pretending everything was fine. "I've decided to go back to school," Lisa continued. "I'm enrolling in a nursing program. I want to become a nurse." Rachel blinked, surprised. "That's wonderful, Lisa, really, you'll be great at it." "I'm doing it because of you," Lisa said, and her eyes filled with the familiar tears. "Because of what you did. Not just saving Miguel, but everything since. The way the nurses and doctors and therapists have helped you. I watched them work with you in the hospital and I realized I want to do that. I want to help people the way they helped you. The way you helped me. Something shifted in Rachel's chest. Not quite hope, but something close to it. A tiny crack in the gray wall that had surrounded her for months. Miguel wouldn't be here without you, Lisa went on. I wouldn't have my son. He wouldn't have his first birthday next month, or his first words, or his first steps, or any of the thousands of moments I'm going to get to have with him. And that's because of you? Because you ran into the street when you could have stayed safe in your car. Miguel chose that moment to roll over and grab at Rachel's wheelchair wheel, babbling happily. He'd gotten so much bigger since the accident. He was sitting up on his own now, reaching for everything, starting to show his personality. This happy, healthy baby who was alive because of a split-second decision. I know it's been hard, Lisa said quietly. I can see it. And I feel guilty about it every single day. You saved us and it cost you so much. But I need you to know that it mattered. What you did, it rippled outward. Because now I'm going to be a nurse and I'm going to help people. And maybe I'll save someone someday too. And that's because of you. Rachel felt tears running down her face. She hadn't cried in front of anyone in weeks. She'd been holding everything in, keeping it locked away. But now it all came pouring out. The pain and the fear and the grief and the anger at how unfair everything was. Lisa moved to sit beside her, careful not to jar her injured leg, and just held her hand while she cried. Miguel continued playing on the floor, oblivious to the emotional storm happening above him. When Rachel finally stopped crying, she felt wrung out, but somehow lighter. Like she'd been carrying a weight she didn't know was there until it was gone. I'm sorry, Rachel said, wiping at her face. I don't know where that came from. Don't apologize, Lisa said firmly. You've been through hell. You're allowed to cry about it. They sat in silence for a while, watching Miguel play. He'd found one of Lily's toys, a set of colorful blocks, and was systematically knocking them over and squealing with delight. Can I ask you something? Rachel said. And I want an honest answer. Of course. Do you think it was worth it? What I did? Lisa looked at her for a long moment. I think that's the wrong question. The right question is, if you went back to that moment knowing everything that would happen, would you still do it? Rachel thought about that. If she could go back to that Tuesday afternoon, standing at that red light, watching Lisa struggle with her bags and Miguel in his stroller, if she knew that saving them would cost her mobility and her career and months of pain and all the challenges still to come, would she still run into the street? The answer came immediately and it surprised her. Yes, she said. I would. I'd do it again. Then it was worth it, Lisa said simply. Maybe not in ways that make sense on a balance sheet. Maybe not in ways that feel fair. But if you do it again, then it was worth it. After Lisa left, Rachel sat alone in the living room for a long time. The house was quiet. David wouldn't be home for hours. The kids were still at school. It was just her and her thoughts and the physical therapy equipment gathering dust in the corner, because she'd skipped her exercises that morning. She thought about Lisa going back to school to become a nurse. She thought about Miguel growing up, having a life, making his own impacts on the world. She thought about the ripples Lisa had mentioned, how one action could spread outward in ways you'd never see or know about. For the first time since the accident, Rachel wondered if maybe there was more to her story than just loss. Maybe there could be something else, not a happy ending, because she wasn't naive enough to think everything would go back to normal, but perhaps a different kind of story, one where the hero didn't just save the day and then disappear. One where the hero had to figure out how to live with the consequences of heroism. The next morning, Rachel asked David to help her to the physical therapy room. She did her exercises, all of them, even though it hurt, even though she wanted to quit. Then she asked him to look up information about support groups for people with mobility impairments. And she made an appointment with a therapist who specialized in trauma and disability. It wasn't much. A few small steps that didn't change the fact that her left leg still barely worked, or that she still needed a wheelchair to get around. But it was something. A beginning. Because if Lisa could go back to school and change her entire life trajectory because of what happened, maybe Rachel could figure out how to live a different kind of life too. Not the life she'd planned. Not the life she'd had before. But maybe a life that still had meaning. A life that was still worth living. She wasn't there yet. The depression hadn't magically lifted. The pain didn't stop. The challenges didn't disappear. But for the first time in months, Rachel felt something other than despair. She felt the tiniest spark of possibility, and for now that was enough to keep going. 6 months after the accident, Rachel walked into her first support group meeting. Well, rolled into it, technically. She maneuvered her wheelchair through the doorway of the community center, her palms sweating with nervousness. She almost turned around 3 times on the way over. The only reason she didn't was because David had taken an afternoon off work to drive her there, and she couldn't bring herself to waste his time. The room was set up in a circle of chairs with spaces left open for wheelchairs. About a dozen people were already there, ranging in age from early 20s to late 60s. Some had visible disabilities: wheelchairs, prosthetics, canes. Others looked perfectly healthy until they started talking about invisible injuries and chronic pain. A woman in her 50s with kind eyes and short gray hair smiled at Rachel. "First time?" Rachel nodded, not trusting her voice. "I'm Patricia. I've been coming here for 2 years. After a car accident left me with nerve damage in both legs." She gestured to her cane. "It gets easier. Not the injury, that pretty much is what it is. But dealing with it gets easier." The group leader, a man named Tom who'd lost the use of his legs in a rock climbing accident, started the meeting. They went around the circle, everyone sharing their name and, if they wanted, a little about what brought them there. When it got to Rachel's turn, she almost passed. But something made her speak. "I'm Rachel. I was hit by a car 6 months ago while pushing a mother and baby out of the way. I have limited mobility in my left leg and probably always will." She paused, surprised by how matter-of-fact it sounded when she said it out loud. "I'm here because I don't know how to live like this." "That's honest," Tom said. "And honestly is what we do here. So welcome." Over the next hour, Rachel listened to stories that were both completely different from hers and eerily similar. A construction worker who'd fallen from scaffolding, a woman who'd survived cancer but lost her ability to walk as a side effect of treatment, a young guy who'd been in a motorcycle accident. All of them dealing with the same core challenge. How do you rebuild your life when your body won't cooperate? But what struck Rachel most was that they were rebuilding. They talked about adaptations they'd made, victories they'd achieved, frustrations they were working through. They laughed at the absurdity of certain situations. They cried about the hard parts. They were honest in a way Rachel hadn't been with anyone, including herself. After the meeting, Patricia caught up with Rachel in the parking lot. "You said you saved someone's life. A baby. And his mother." Patricia studied her for a moment. "And you're angry about it." Rachel started to deny it, then stopped. "This was a place for honesty," Tom had said. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Is that awful? I saved a baby's life. I should feel good about that. But sometimes I'm so angry. At the driver who hit me, at the universe for putting me at that intersection at that exact moment, at myself for running into the street." "That's not awful," Patricia said. "That's human. You can be glad the baby is safe and still grieve what you lost. Those two things don't cancel each other out." It was such a simple statement, but it hit Rachel like a revelation. She'd been treating her feelings like they had to be either or. Either she was a hero who felt good about her sacrifice, or she was a terrible person who regretted saving a life. But maybe it could be both. Maybe she could hold both truths at the same time. Rachel started going to the support group every week, and slowly, almost without noticing, she started to change. Not her body. Her left leg still didn't work right, and she still needed the wheelchair for any significant distance. But her mindset shifted. She started talking to a therapist, too. Dr. Linda Chen was a psychologist who specialized in trauma and disability. She helped Rachel work through the complicated tangle of emotions around the accident. The grief, the anger, the guilt, the fear. They talked about identity. How much of Rachel's sense of self had been tied up in being physically capable, and how to build a new identity that wasn't defined by what she'd lost. It wasn't quick or easy. Some days Rachel backslid into depression. Some days the pain was so bad she couldn't think about anything else. But gradually she started having more good days than bad ones. One afternoon, about 8 months after the accident, Rachel got a phone call from the principal of her school. She'd been expecting it to be about her resignation, which they'd discussed, but she hadn't officially filed yet. Instead, Mrs. Reynolds had a proposal. "We don't want to lose you," the principal said. "You're an incredible teacher. So we've been thinking, what if we create a different position for you? We need someone to coordinate our remote learning program. You'd work from home mostly, helping design curriculum, training teachers on technology, supporting students who need virtual options. It wouldn't be the classroom, but it would still be teaching. Rachel felt tears prickling at her eyes. She'd thought her teaching career was over. She'd been mourning that loss along with everything else. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it. We can make accommodations. Flexible schedule, ergonomic setup, whatever you need. We want you back, Rachel, in whatever capacity works for you. After they hung up, Rachel sat staring at her phone. A different kind of teaching job. Not what she'd planned, but maybe what she needed. A way to stay connected to the work she loved while acknowledging her new limitations. She talked it over with David that night. "Do you think I can do it?" she asked. "Working from home, being on video calls all day, coordinating programs." "I think you can do anything you set your mind to," David said, and the look in his eyes reminded her why she'd married him. He'd stuck by her through everything. The surgeries, the depression, the financial stress, the moments when she'd been so difficult, even she didn't want to be around herself. But the question isn't whether you can do it. It's whether you want to. Did she want to? Rachel thought about it for days. This wasn't the career she'd imagined. She'd loved being in the classroom, seeing her students' faces light up when they understood something new, getting hugs at recess, decorating bulletin boards for each season. Remote learning coordination would be completely different, but different didn't have to mean worse. It could just mean different. She called Mrs. Reynolds and accepted the position. Around the same time, something else started to shift. Lisa had finished her first semester of nursing school and kept telling Rachel about her classes. The more they talked, the more Rachel found herself interested in the medical side of things. Not nursing necessarily, but something. At her next support group meeting, Tom mentioned that he sometimes did speaking engagements at schools and community centers, talking about disability awareness and resilience. "They pay pretty well," he said. "And honestly, it feels good to turn my experience into something that helps other people understand." Rachel had never thought of herself as a public speaker. But she'd been a teacher for years. She knew how to talk to groups, how to make complex ideas accessible, how to connect with people, and she had a story, a dramatic, compelling story about heroism and sacrifice and the messy reality of what comes after. She reached out to a few local organizations and offered to speak about her experience. The response was immediate and enthusiastic. Within weeks, she had her first booking, a high school assembly about making split-second decisions and living with consequences. The night before the assembly, Rachel was terrified. What if she froze up? What if the students didn't care? What if telling her story in public made her fall apart? But when she rolled onto that auditorium stage and looked out at hundreds of teenagers staring at their phones or chatting with friends, something clicked into place. This was teaching, just in a different form, and she knew how to do this. She told them about that October afternoon, about the ordinary grocery store trip that turned into the most significant moment of her life, about the split second when she had to choose between staying safe and running into danger, about the baby she saved and the price she paid. But she also told them the parts the news stories never covered. The depression, the anger, the moments when she regretted everything. The slow, painful process of rebuilding. The support group where she learned she wasn't alone. The therapy that helped her work through trauma. The husband who stood by her and the kids who adapted and the stranger who became a friend. People want hero stories to be simple, Rachel said, looking out at the now quiet auditorium. Every student was paying attention. They want a clear moment of bravery and then everything's fine. Happy ending, roll credits. But real life doesn't work that way. Real heroism is messy. It costs something. Sometimes it costs everything. She paused, gathering her thoughts. But here's what I've learned. The cost doesn't make the choice wrong. I saved a baby's life that day, and yes, it changed my life forever, and not in ways I would have chosen. But that baby is going to grow up. He's going to have first days of school and birthday parties and probably some terrible teenage years. He's going to fall in love someday. Maybe he'll have kids of his own. All of that gets to happen because I ran into the street. A girl in the third row raised her hand. Do you regret it? Rachel had been asked that question 100 times. By reporters, by friends, by family. She'd given different answers depending on the day and her mood. But sitting there in that auditorium, she finally knew the truth. No, she said. I don't regret it. I grieve what I lost. I'm angry about the unfairness of it. I have bad days when I wish none of this had happened. But regret? No, because if I regret it, then I'm saying that baby's life wasn't worth saving. And I can't say that. I won't say that. The auditorium erupted in applause. Not the polite, obligatory clapping you get at school assemblies, but real, sustained applause. Some students were wiping their eyes. The teachers in the back of the room looked moved. Afterward, students lined up to talk to her. They told her about their own challenges, about disabilities they or their family members faced, about hard choices they were dealing with, about fears they had about the future. And Rachel realized that her story, her messy, painful, complicated story, was helping them. Not by being inspirational or heroic, but by being honest. She drove home that afternoon feeling something she hadn't felt in months. Purpose. Not the same purpose she'd had before, but purpose nonetheless. Her life had changed. Her body had changed. Her career had changed. But maybe she could still make a difference. Just in a different way. That evening, Rachel sat down with David and the kids. Lily was working on homework at the kitchen table. Her son Ryan was building something with Legos in the living room. David was making dinner. It was ordinary and domestic and nothing special. And for the first time since the accident, Rachel felt grateful for it. Grateful to be here in this moment with her family. Grateful that she could still work even if it looked different now. Grateful for the support group and the therapy and the friends who'd stuck around. Grateful for Lisa and Miguel and the ripple effects of that October afternoon that she was only beginning to understand. She still had challenges ahead. Her body would probably never fully recover. She'd deal with pain and limitations for the rest of her life. But she was learning to live with that. Learning to build a life that acknowledged her disabilities without being defined by them. Rachel wasn't the same person who'd driven home from the grocery store that Tuesday. That woman was gone, lost on the pavement along with her mobility. But maybe the woman she was becoming was okay too. Maybe even better in some ways. More empathetic, more honest, more real. She wasn't finished becoming that woman. The transformation was ongoing, a daily choice to keep growing instead of staying stuck in grief. But for the first time since the accident, Rachel felt like she could see a path forward. Not back to who she'd been, but toward something new. Something different, but still worthwhile, and that was enough. For now, that was more than enough. 2 years after the accident, Rachel stood at a crosswalk. Not the same intersection where her life had changed forever. She still avoided that corner, probably always would. But a crosswalk nonetheless. She stood there with the help of a custom leg brace and a cane, watching the light cycle from red to green. Standing was progress. 6 months of experimental physical therapy had given her back more mobility than the doctors initially thought possible. She still couldn't walk without assistance. She probably never would, but she could stand for several minutes now. She could take slow, careful steps. She could navigate her house without the wheelchair most days. The bad days still existed. Days when the pain flared up so badly she couldn't get out of bed. Days when her left leg simply refused to cooperate. Days when she needed the wheelchair and felt the old frustration and grief come rushing back. But those days were fewer now, and on the good days she could stand at a crosswalk and feel the autumn sun on her face and remember why she was still here. Today was a good day. A special day, actually. The community was holding an event at the town hall and Rachel was the guest of honor. She'd tried to decline when they first approached her, uncomfortable with being in the spotlight, but the organizers had been persistent, and eventually she'd agreed. David pulled up to the curb and Rachel made her way carefully to the car. Every movement still required thought and attention. There was no such thing as mindless walking anymore, but she'd learned to accept that. Her body worked differently now and that was okay. You ready for this? David asked as she settled into the passenger seat. Not even a little bit, Rachel admitted, but let's do it anyway. The town hall parking lot was already filling up when they arrived. David helped her out of the car, and she took a moment to steady herself with the cane. Through the large windows, she could see people gathering inside. More people than she'd expected. Lisa was waiting at the entrance and Miguel toddled beside her, clutching her hand. He was almost 2 now, a sturdy little boy with his mother's dark eyes and a smile that could light up a room. When he saw Rachel, he pulled away from Lisa and ran toward her on unsteady legs. Ray Ray, he called out, his version of her name. Lisa had been bringing him to visit so regularly that he knew Rachel as well as any aunt or family friend. Rachel bent down carefully, balancing on her cane, and Miguel crashed into her for a hug. This was what it was all about, she thought. This little boy who wouldn't be here if she hadn't run into that street. Every scraped knee and temper tantrum and terrible twos moment he'd ever have, she'd made that possible. He's been talking about seeing you all morning, Lisa said, coming up behind her son. She was wearing her nursing school scrubs, heading to a clinical rotation right after the event. She'd be graduating in a few months. He made me promise we'd get ice cream after. Sounds like my kind of plan, Rachel said, ruffling Miguel's hair. Inside, the hall was packed. Rachel recognized faces from her support group, from the school district, from around town. The local news had sent a camera crew. She felt a flutter of nerves but pushed it down. She'd gotten better at public speaking over the past year. She'd done dozens of talks at schools and community centers and conferences. This was just another event. A bigger one, sure, but still just people wanting to hear a story. The mayor welcomed everyone and gave a speech about community and heroism that made Rachel uncomfortable in its praise. She didn't feel like a hero most days. She felt like someone who'd made a split-second decision and then had to live with the consequences. But she smiled politely and waited for her turn to speak. When they called her name, Rachel made her way to the podium. The walk across the stage was slow and deliberate, each step carefully placed. She heard the sound of her cane against the wooden floor. A few years ago, she would have been embarrassed by that sound, by the visible evidence of her disability. Now she barely thought about it. She looked out at the crowd and saw her kids sitting in the front row with David. Lily was 9 now. Ryan was 11. They'd grown so much in the past 2 years. They'd adapted to having a mom with a disability better than Rachel had adapted herself. They'd learned patience and compassion and that people can be strong in different ways. 2 years ago, Rachel began. I pushed a stroller out of the way of an oncoming car and got hit instead. The news called me a hero. People said I was brave, selfless, inspiring, and I appreciate that, I really do. But here's what those stories didn't tell you. She paused, gathering her thoughts. This was the part where she had to be honest. Really honest in a way that might make people uncomfortable. They didn't tell you about the months of depression, about lying in bed wishing I hadn't survived the accident because at least then I wouldn't have to deal with the pain and the disability and the complete upheaval of my entire life. They didn't tell you about the fights with my husband because I was so angry and he was so tired and we were drowning in medical bills. They didn't tell you about my daughter asking me why I didn't love them anymore, because I'd become so withdrawn and distant. The room had gone very quiet. Rachel could see some people shifting uncomfortably. Good. Discomfort meant they were really listening.